So then we had this other developer. His name was Brent Harrington. And I'll show you his little quote here, okay? I don't know if you can, I'm sorry this is so hard to read. He says, as a developer, it's been humbling to see how much a small, simple thing, such as an inexpensive thing as a small farm, can be a development's most loved amenity. Now, what he was talking about, this guy is a resort developer, okay? His most famous project is a project outside in Scottsdale, Arizona called DC Ranch, which is this really high-end master plan community. So now they're building a community, a resort on the island of Kauai called Kaihula. And they have, they have a, you know, like all these like fancy resorts, it's got a golf course and an incredible spa. The golf course and the spa collectively cost them almost $100 million, okay? But what he told us is they also have a 30-acre farm. And that 30-acre farm grows every kind of like tropical fruit and vegetable you can think of, like papaya and mango and breadfruit and pineapples. And turns out that that small 30-acre farm, which including the land, the farmer that takes care of it, the marketing, everything, costs them about $800,000 a year. Okay? That has had a bigger impact on their sales and marketing than their golf course and their spa for 1/100th of the cost. Okay? So, interestingly, this is like farming is coming into our cities. Now, this is an interesting quote. Growing your own food is like printing your own money. Okay? And so this is sort of reflects the interest in kind of urban agriculture and urban edge agriculture. I always get a kick out of these people who think, you know, like, let's do vertical farming. I'm like, vertical farming? That, like, think how much that would cost when all you got to do is figure out how to save urban edge agriculture. And usually, urban edge farms are were the best farms because that was, you know, we always built our cities around farms. We're just right outside of our cities. And it costs a lot less to, you know, protect an urban edge farm than to build a skyscraper and put some gardens up on top, you know, which is what I hear people talking about sometimes, which is a kind of a crazy thing. So outdoor recreation, that is another huge industry, and you've got like all kind of opportunities here, you know, so it's not just farming, it's also nature and thinking about all the ways, you know, hunting, fishing, bird watching, you know, watchable wildlife is one of the fastest growing forms of outdoor recreation in the United States. Well, what we're finding is that, you know, camping, biking, trail recreation are all extraordinarily popular and extraordinarily lucrative in our region. Recreational boating. You got the James River right there, and you got the York River right on the other side over here. I mean, think about that as something. Agriculture and commercial fishing. I mean, you know, so when you start to think about the rural economy, there's a lot of things that we could work on and build on that would grow that. Now, I want to talk a little bit about demographics and how they're affecting the economy. So the U.S. is changing demographically just in incredible amounts. First of all, we're getting older. That's my generation, the baby boomers, 80 million people. We're getting younger, Gen Y. That's the biggest generation in American history, 85 million people. We're getting more diverse. The vast majority of American households in every community in America has no school-age children. Nationwide, it's 75% of all households have no school-age children. What is the fastest growing form of household in the United States? A single person living alone. Now think about that. So we've been, you know, you have zoning in this county for 1 house per 3 acres in rural areas, okay? Turns out that we have an oversupply of large lot housing everywhere in America and an undersupply of everything else. Attached housing, condominiums, cottages, small lot housing, in-town housing. You know, do you think that a single woman living alone wants a 3-acre lot? You know, that's, you know, too big to maintain but too small to farm for her? You know, turns out, and also think about young people. Young people, turns out, want to live in the center of it all. They want to live in walkable neighborhoods, whether that's in a city or a small town. They are driving less. You know, driving's actually going down in the United States for the first time in 75 years. You know, that's why we have all these new companies like Zipcar, okay? Young people are getting married later or not at all. They're postponing home ownership. Partly because this is going to be the first generation that's not going to be as well off as their parents were. They don't have as much money. So it turns out a lot of these young people want to live in places where they can walk things. Now let's talk about how this might affect a place like James City County, Williamsburg. I was in South Florida a couple weeks ago in Lee County. That's where Fort Myers is. That's sort of, you know, ground zero for the retirement industry in Florida. It also was ground zero for the foreclosures in Florida. I'll tell you why. Part of the reason they've had so many foreclosures. Here's why. Because, for example, there's a large master plan community there called Estero. For many years, it was one of the fastest growing retirement communities in the United States. It is a gated community, golf around, you know, through 3,000 to 6,000 foot houses designed around golf courses. Well, now about 40% of the people who live there are 65 years of age or older. And a large number of those people have suddenly decided they would like to downsize. They don't want a 3,000 to 6,000 square foot house anymore, but they prohibited anything else. And by the way, the young people, turns out, don't want to buy houses in gated golf course communities. So they're actually having a hard time selling the houses, which is one of the reasons we had so many foreclosures. So demographics is changing the market for what will sell in the world of real estate. What about technology? Technology has created the death of distance. We can do business anywhere in the world today. So once again, if you can't differentiate James City County from any other place, you have no competitive advantage. Turns out things like quality of life and amenities become really important in business relocation decisions. Let me give you an example. Some of you may have heard of Foster Freeze. He was one of Mitt Romney's single largest contributors in the recent presidential election. Foster Freeze runs a mutual fund company called the Brandywine Investment Group. And this company was headquartered in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania for about 40 years. It was founded by his father. But Foster Freeze likes to fly fish. So every summer, Foster Freeze would hop in the airplane and fly to Jackson, Wyoming to go fly fishing. And then one day, he's stuck in traffic on the Schuylkill Expressway outside of Philadelphia, and all of a sudden a light bulb goes on in his mind. He says, boy, I can run a mutual fund company anywhere in the world. And so guess what? He picks up his entire company and moves it into downtown Jackson, Wyoming. That is the largest private sector employer in Jackson today. He's there for one reason. It's called access to outdoor recreation. Okay? Who would have thought that that was a driver for economic development? But you can use your access to outdoor recreation in this county as one of the drivers and competitive advantages that you can have to attract other businesses that go well beyond the agricultural sector. Okay, so think about how just building on those assets makes sense. And so here's the study. The Montana State University at Bozeman did a study. They went and interviewed every new business that had opened in the 3 counties that abut Yellowstone over a 5-year period. This was everything from manufacturing to professionals to doctors. They said, why did you move here? Here's the list. Notice that low taxes and regulatory relief are not on the list, okay? Well, it's the scenic beauty of the region was number 1. Quality environment, good place to raise a family, access to outdoor recreation, small town atmosphere. You got all those things too. Okay, but you know what's interesting about that is if you had gone to the county commissioners of Teton County, Wyoming, for example, 20 years ago and asked them to do anything to save, like preserve scenic beauty, like perhaps like pass a sign ordinance, they would have said, oh, you can't do that because it's bad for business. Well, it turns out it's just the opposite. It's actually incredibly good for business because if you mess up the scenic beauty, then you've lost your prime advantage. So guess what? So Jackson, I don't know how many people have been to Jackson, Wyoming, but in the winter, they have this thing right next to downtown Jackson. It's called the National Elk Refuge. And if you go there in the winter, there's anywhere from 25,000 to 30,000 elk grazing right outside of downtown Jackson. It's the largest wildlife spectacle in North America. It's like the American Serengeti. But the elk summer in the high elevations. They winter in the low elevations right outside town. But suppose you started building subdivision in the middle of all the wildlife migration corridors. Pretty soon there'd be no more elk, and then there'd be no more tourists in the winter. So thinking about your asset and how you actually, so they mapped their wildlife migration corridors and figured out ways to encourage development not to be in the middle of the wildlife migration corridors. That's what means by asset-based economic development. Let's talk about consumer attitudes, and I'm going to come back to this. This is a front-page story from USA Today. Like, malls are like totally uncool, say hip teens. Okay, and what this article is about the average amount of time that Americans spend at an enclosed mall or a strip center has been going down for years. They go to buy what they want and they leave. In fact, 15 years ago, the average number of mall visits per year by teenagers was about 40 per year. Now it's down to about 20 per year. That's half. Okay? And that's part of the reason why we haven't opened a single new mall in the United States since the year 2006, not one. And I'll come back and talk about that in a minute. So market trends, okay? This is a quote from the National Association of Home Builders who are talking about how it's becoming clear that the old one-size-fits-all marketing and product approach won't work for buyer groups whose interest in borrowing requirements differ widely, not only from each other, but from buyers of the recent past. In other words, different demographics want different types of housing. And if you remember, we built housing, once again, you've done this in this county too, you built your housing like every single family was the Waltons. The mom, the dad, the 2 kids, and the dog. That is a minority of American families today. So, if you're not building housing for those other people, you're going to get the supply-demand imbalance off. It won't work anymore. So you just keep building rural subdivisions. The market for rural subdivisions, there's still, some people do want a rural subdivision, but there's a growing number who don't. So think about, the world of economics. So here in Virginia, I want to talk a little bit about sort of, kind of what we've done. We've done a pretty good job, I think, of saving some of the landmarks of our historic places here in Virginia, but we've done a lot less good job of saving the landscape that gives those landmarks their larger sense of meaning. And why don't you can flip the whites down now, because I actually can sort of zip through this. So, that's kind of, and we've been cleaning up air and water here in Virginia. We've done a pretty good job of this over the last 50 years. But while we've been cleaning up air and water pollution, we've simultaneously been losing our sense of place. If I were to take you up in an airplane tomorrow morning and then just drop you along a road outside of most American cities, you wouldn't have any idea where you were, because it all looks exactly the same. Where is this? Albany, Allentown, Providence, Pittsburgh, Richmond, or Rochester? Who can tell? The great American author Wallace Stegner once wrote, he said, quote, "If you don't know where you are, you don't know who you are." And by that, I think he meant that every single American has a fundamental need for a sense of orientation, for a sense of roots, for a sense of place. Sense of place. What is that? Well, it's a couple things. First, it's what makes your hometown different from my hometown. It's like what makes Tappahannock, Virginia different from Tacoma Park, Maryland. But more importantly, I believe that sense of place, ladies and gentlemen, is explicitly that which makes our physical surroundings worth caring about. That which makes our physical surroundings worth caring about. I can tell you that in many parts of the world today, we're suffering the social, economic, and environmental consequences of creating places like that simply aren't worth caring about. And for all the improvements in cleaner air and cleaner water and better roads, better schools, faster computers, people still say, is this all there is? Can't our communities be more distinctive, more livable, more beautiful? Can't we have more connection with nature and the outdoors? So I guess one of the questions is, how do you prevent James City County from becoming any place USA? And I think you've done a fairly good job of that. But given, we are going to add 100 million more people to this country by the year 2050. We're growing by about 3 million people a year in the United States. Okay? You're going to get your fair share of those people. So what is James City County going to be like a decade from now? So that's kind of an important question. And once again, you can anticipate, prepare, and shape the changes coming. You can just let it happen, which is why this discussion is kind of important. So let's talk about how do you keep from destroying the goose that lays the golden egg. If you read the Washington Post or the Atlanta Constitution or Charlotte Observer before the start of the recession, almost every week in the metro sections of any of those newspapers was an article about fights about development. We were like fighting development like every place in the country, and certainly here in Virginia it was like a full-time job fighting development. But it turns out that we're going to grow. The question for you in James City County is not whether you're going to grow, it is how. So, you know, we ought to be thinking more about not whether we're going to have development, what it, you know, about the patterns of development. Where do you put it? How do you arrange it? What does it look like? So let's think about those three things. So let's talk about the first one. Seems to me that the first principle of better development in any community anywhere in America is figuring out where you should not develop. And the reason for that is because, of course, some places are better for development than other places. And that principle applies at every scale, from the site scale to the neighborhood scale to the regional scale. You know, I'll tell you something funny about those houses. Guess what? They're all gone now, because building out in front of the dune line at the beach is really not the smartest thing in the world to do. Or how about building in a floodplain or a steep slope or on a Civil War battlefield, which we've done lots of here in Virginia. So, you know, part of it is sort of thinking about where you shouldn't grow. So every community, I would suggest to you in America, needs a long-range conservation plan, just like you need a long-range transportation plan. This is an aerial view on the right, by the way. If you fly from Dulles Airport and you're making the turn over Montgomery County, flying back into Dulles Airport, that's what the landscape looks like there. And the reason is because Montgomery County has what they call their agricultural preserve. That's 150,000 acres of preserved agriculture in the most populous county in Maryland, a county with 1 million people in it, and that's Loudoun County right across the river from there. So, you know, why would let's say I'm in the development community, why would I care about that? And I spend a lot of my time talking to developers. I'll tell you why, because, you know, thinking about the future and where you might not want to develop is like creating a blueprint for the future. It's kind of like if you're driving down a highway at 70 miles an hour and you hit a fog bank, what are you going to do? You slam the brakes on because you can't see where you're going. That's exactly what people in Virginia wanted to do with development when they couldn't see what the future looked like. So if you actually planned ahead of time for the preservation of some important landscape, then it becomes easier to facilitate and encourage development in the places that you want it, which is the other side of the coin. And turns out, by the way, that green space is extraordinarily popular. It turns out it is the single most popular thing American voters vote on. There's not a single form of referendum in the United States, well, I don't care whether it's a school bond, a transportation bond, nothing has a higher rate of approval than people voting to protect open space and putting their dollars behind their votes, even in the last presidential election. So, you know, Alabama, where I grew up, approved in 2012 a $300 million referendum called Alabama Forever Wild. That's going to provide $30 million a year for the next 10 years to protect open space in the state of Alabama. So green space creates value in lots of different ways. Reduces the cost of public services. Let me give you an example. So the state of New York was under orders from the EPA to bring the drinking water of the city of New York up to the standards of the Clean Water Drinking Act. They had two ways they could do that. One is they could build new water filtration plants. Cost of new water filtration plants for New York City estimated between $5 and $6 billion. So instead, they bought all the land around the reservoirs in the Catskill Mountains where the water comes from. Cost $1 billion. And then they gave the counties in the Catskills $500 million because they were taking land off the tax rolls. Okay, 1.5 billion versus 6 billion. Well, let me give you another example. So did you know that 1 acre of asphalt will generate 16 times as much runoff as 1 acre of meadow or forest land? So more asphalt means, you know, less affordable housing, more soil erosion, less sedimentation, more non-point source pollution running off into our rivers and streams. You know, green space is very valuable. Let's think about how we arrange development. There's a lot of different ways to arrange development. You know, should we, invest downtown, or should we invest out on the strip? Should we, spread out, or should we grow more compactly? Should we put all the parking in front of every building, or maybe could we put it behind? It's about thinking about how you arrange development is pretty important. And you know, we actually had a model for development in the United States for about 300 years, and we called that model a town. And what we've learned is that a town is not just a charming anachronism, it's actually a model for how we could build in the future. So, you know, towns always were walkable and pedestrian friendly. You knew where the town ended and the countryside began. You always had a mix of uses and housing types. It was architecturally coherent and beautiful, had a strong sense of community, a wonderful sense of place. And then starting about 1960, we forgot about that model And we came up with a new model. We called that model sprawl. We have all the same things we used to have. The difference is how we arrange them on the landscape. We kind of now randomly sling everything across the landscape. And so now, you know, you segregate all the uses. So you put the shopping centers here and the regional high school there and the housing over here, and we segregate all the houses by income. So you put the $400,000 houses in that subdivision and the $200,000 houses in that subdivision. And now, of course, you got to drive everywhere for everything. It's architecturally chaotic and ugly. It's very hard to have a sense of community, and there's no sense of place. You know, so think about this. Here's the kind of question we ask the development community. What's more important to more people? The size of the lot or the character of the neighborhood? Turns out when you ask people that, they say, oh no, you know, the neighborhood is more important than just how big the lot is for most people. All right, where do you put development? How do you arrange it? What does it look like? Welcome to Petersburg, home of the El Cheapo rental car and many other highlights of the Petersburg tour. And what's interesting about Petersburg, of course, it has, you know, this incredible national park there, site of the largest and longest battle in American history. The siege of Petersburg killed 100,000 Americans. But Petersburg, sadly, is one of these communities that people go to once and never go back because they don't really seem to care what they look like. So, you know, when you think about this, think about what Mark Twain said. We take stock of a city or a county like we take stock of a man. The clothes or appearance are the externals by which we judge. The National Association of Realtors put it this way. They say a community's appeal drives economic prosperity. So if you don't remember anything else I say today, well, let me just back up. Okay, so let's talk for a second about a community's front door, its gateway. And just like with meeting a person, a good first impression is important and a bad first impression is hard to change. You think you'd rather visit the town of Franklin, Virginia, or would you rather go to the town of Midfield, Alabama? Which one looks more like a community with a sense of pride and a sense of place? But more importantly, which one looks like more like a community you would rather invest time or money in? If you don't remember anything else I say this afternoon, remember this. The image of a community is fundamentally important to its economic well-being. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is that every single day in America, people make decisions about where to live, where to invest, where to vacation, where to retire, based on what our communities look like, what they look like. And part of the look of a community is its rural landscape. So, you know, this is the official travel guide for the state of Oregon. Because it's out of focus, I don't know if you can read it. It says their slogan is, Oregon, things look different here. Can you imagine, you know, Virginia having a brochure that says something like, Virginia, things look the same here? Well, of course not. Because what is tourism? Tourism is about visiting places that are different, unusual, and unique. The more James City County does to preserve its uniqueness, whether that is natural or cultural or architectural or agriculture, whatever, the more people would want to come here. On the other hand, the more James City County becomes to be just like every place else in America, the less reason there would be to come. Because, you know, think about it. If every place was just like every place else, there'd be no reason to go anyplace. So this is a new book by the World Bank. It's called The Economics of Uniqueness, and they make this point I've already made a couple of times. They say if you can't differentiate yourself, you'll have no competitive advantage. Put another way, they say sameness is a minus in the world we live in today, not a plus. You know, you've probably heard the slogan, keep Austin weird. Turns out that's not just a funny slogan, it's an economic development imperative. And what it really means is keep Austin different, unusual, unique, keep them on the cutting edge. And so, once again, here in James City County, what are the unique characteristics that set this county apart from other counties in Virginia and on the East Coast? And then build on those assets. Can you turn the light back on for me for just a second? So I know sometimes people say to me, they say, well, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Well, you really think that's true? Let me ask you this question. Do you think this scenic view has more economic value, or do you think that scenic view has more economic value? Let me just read you something that the National Association of Real Estate Appraisers says about this concept. They say, quote, you can put a dollar value on a view. Scenic landscapes are an economic asset, not just because you and I think they're nice, but because other people are willing to pay to see the view and to experience the unique character of a place. They go on to say, quote, housing, hotels, offices with scenic views always command premium prices. The better the view, the higher the price. Now think about this. If you go to the beach in the summer and you rent a hotel room with a view of the ocean, you will pay more for that room than the exact same room on the other side of the hotel. What are you paying for? What I'm suggesting to you is that the scenic landscapes, the rural landscapes of this county have quantifiable economic value, which is just one of the reasons why some of these landscapes would be worth preserving. So, you know, it's interesting, the home builders, they kind of figured this out. So way back in 1994, the National Association of Home Builders, excuse me, I have a failed hip replacement. I'm going to have to sit here for a few minutes. And way back in 1994, the National Association of Home Builders did a study. And they were trying to figure out, well, what was it that would add value to a home more than anything else? Was it like the kitchen, like the garage? Was it granite countertops? Was it like Viking appliances? What was it? Here's what they found. They found, quote, the surrounding environment is the single most important factor affecting the market value of a home. A mountain vista or proximity to a park, water, or green space affects the value of a home more than the size of the house, the number of rooms, the type of appliances, or even the presence of a swimming pool. The surrounding environment is the single most important factor affecting the market value of a home. So, in fact, there are literally hundreds of studies that show that green space increases the value of residential property. I mean, think about it. You know, where's the most valuable land in all of New York State? There it is. It's the land next to Central Park. You can hit the light again if you, so it's a little hard. So this is, you know, what we did for years. I already talked about this, golf course developments. So we arranged all these houses around the golf course. But, you know, what we found out is that more than 65% of the buyers, all of the United States on average, don't play golf. And so we asked them, why did they buy the house? They say, oh, I like to live next to the protected open space. Well, once again, people will pay now. Turns out farming's becoming the new golf. People actually like to live next to vineyards and orchards and open space. And, you know, that's one of the ways you can preserve things. So here's like what I was talking about before, a golf course community without the golf course. And what can you do here? Well, you can't play golf, but you can walk your dog, you can throw a Frisbee, you can have a picnic, you can play with your kids, you can do anything you want. And by the way, what is the most popular form of outdoor recreation in the United States? Anybody know? Walking for pleasure, number one, by far. Walking. In fact, the National Recreation and Park Association did a study where they said if you built a public golf course, on average, about 2 to 3% of people in the community would use a public golf course. If you built a public swimming pool, on average, 10 to 12% of people in the community will use a public swimming pool. If you build a public pathway system, 50 to 60% of the people in the community will use it, because anybody can use it, young, old, able-bodied, disabled, mothers with strollers, you name it. All right. So think about it this way. The place is becoming more important than the product. And so here's one of the things we're starting to do around the country is we're simply separating lot size from density. And so we're simply setting aside, think about it this way. Suppose you had 100 acres and it was all developable. What would make more sense, to have 100 one-acre house lots and no open space, or 100 half-acre house lots and 50 acres of open space? Or maybe 100 quarter-acre lots and 75 acres of open space. Turns out, you know, if you only develop half the land, you use half as much infrastructure, which means you have your road links are shorter, and you can protect rural character. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time. Here's the home builders and realtors did a study, and this is what they said people most want in new home communities. Walking trails and bike paths were number one. Parks and natural areas were number two. Golf was last on the list. All right, I want to say a little bit about changing world of suburban development. So this is the sort of old paradigm, strip mall coming soon. The new paradigm, I want to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, is that the future belongs to town centers and main streets and little towns. And strip retail is retail for the last century. And I want to suggest to you there's some reasons why that's true. And I could go through each of these and spend a lot of time on it. I'm just going to kind of quickly go through this. Let's talk about how we're overbuilt. We saw a 10-fold increase in retail space from 4 square feet a person to almost 40, going from 1960 to about the year 2000. That's double the square feet of any other country in the world. But I tell you, if the recession didn't teach us anything else, it taught us this. We're overstored in suburban strip development in the United States. And the biggest reason is because we were building retail strip centers and malls 5 times faster than retail sales for 20 years. Think about that. So every time somebody would build a new strip center down here, it would cannibalize the one that was, up the street. And that was going on and on. The recession really just multiplied that. Now we have the largest retail vacancy rate in American history, 1.1 billion square feet of vacant retail space, mostly out in the suburbs. The National Association, International Council of Shopping Centers says the only question is, are we overstored or under-demolished? That's how they put it. Okay, let's think about what about the impact of the internet. Who's the fastest growing retailer? It's not Walmart or Target, it's Amazon. By the way, who invented the superstore concept? Staples did. They had all these stores, and then Office Depot and all those companies needed to follow. They called them category killers, 25,000 square foot office supply store. But Staples is now second to Amazon in online sales. So guess what? All their stores are shrinking to 5,000 square feet, which means you can put them back into a town or a city. And think about all the other things. Think about how, streaming video, Netflix has done in the video rental. Every strip center in America used to have a Blockbuster video store, and they're all gone. Think about the Hallmark card stores. People are not sending cards as much. Bookstores like Borders. Turns out actually locally owned bookstores are actually coming back, unlike the publicly traded bookstores. So we have this bookstore in D.C. It's called Politics and Prose, locally owned bookstore. It's like booming because there's still a lot of people who actually like books, but they don't have to have meet their stockholders' expectations every quarter. And then here's another thing. This is, the suburbs are being redesigned all over America, and that's going to be one of the biggest changes you're going to see in the future. And here's another reason why. So we did this. We brought together about 100 developers of shopping centers a couple years ago, and we asked them, among other questions, what are the single defining characteristics of suburban strips? And what they said was, well, it's pretty easy to figure out. First, they're ugly, and second, they're congested. Now, can you imagine running a successful marketing campaign around that slogan? Hey, shop here, we're both ugly and congested. Come on down. Well, that's completely unsustainable. And and by the way, what do you think would happen to that kind of stuff if gas ever reached $5 a gallon in the United States? That's essentially a format without a future. So, it turns out there's only one place left in America with more spending power than stores, and that's in our cities and in our downtowns and of our towns. This is a New York Times article about our love affair with malls is on the rocks, and here's the figures I showed you before. We've closed 10% of all existing malls in the United States just since the year 2006. 30% of other existing malls are being repositioned. We're going to tear down another 10% in the next 10 years. And as I said before, we have about 1 billion square feet of vacant retail space out there right now. And here's an example. This is kind of like a metaphor for America. This is Rockville, Maryland. This is the county seat of Montgomery County. And in 1970, in their infinite wisdom, they decided to tear down their entire downtown and to replace it with these lovely buildings you see in the background here. The low-rise, brutalist architecture concrete building was the Rockville Mall, 200-store mall. And then another mall went in up the street called the White Flint Mall. And that did in the Rockville Mall. So now they've torn the Rockville Mall and they put the down and they took the downtown back. Think about that. They tore the downtown down, they put in a mall, now they're torn the mall down, put the downtown back. And that's actually going on all over the country. And this is the new promised land. Because we've got an excess of development like this everywhere. This is your redevelopment opportunities, is places like this. And we've already got, the infrastructure's already there, and they're easy to redevelop. And so, this is the kind of thing you're seeing in Northern Virginia where we used to do this, but we don't do that anymore. Here's what we do now. We put the housing on top of the Best Buy. And the reason, that's not housing that you want to live in, but it's housing for all those other people we didn't build housing for, the young singles, the unrelated people living together, young professionals, retirees, empty nesters, et cetera, et cetera. We had an undersupply of housing for all those folks. And mixed use can even be pretty easy. This is a This is a new mixed-use building in the town of Herndon, Virginia. That's a new Dairy Queen with a dentist office upstairs. How appropriate. You know, and let's just talk about the economics of this kind of stuff. So here's two Barnes and Noble, and the one on the left is on Rockville Pike, and Rockville Pike is the busiest road in the state of Maryland. That's our super strip. The one on the right, one on the left is on Rockville Pike. The one on the right is in Bethesda, Maryland, downtown Bethesda, but it's 2 blocks off of Wisconsin Avenue. It's part of a development called Bethesda Row. There is no parking in front of that Barnes & Noble on the right. Which one makes more money? Well, it turns out the one on the right makes 20% more per square foot than the one on the left. And why is that? Well, first of all, think of that Rockville Pike. That's a picture of Rockville Pike on the left. You've got Rockville Pikes all over Virginia, okay? Well, there's only one way to get to the Rockville Pikes of the world. It's called drive your car. How about to downtown Bethesda? It turns out there's 4 ways to get to downtown Bethesda. You can drive your car, or you can take the metro, which is a metro stop a block away. You can ride your bike, because there's a thing called the Capitol Crescent Bike Trail, which is an abandoned railroad line that went from the old coal-fired power plant in Georgetown out through Bethesda. It's across the street from that Barnes & Noble. And by the way, you can walk to the Barnes & Noble in Bethesda because thousands of people live within a 10-minute walk. So 4 ways to get to one store, only 1 way to get the other store. And what's the other advantage? It's called the placemaking dividend. This is another example. So this is the Walmart on the left in Asheville, North Carolina. And this is a restored historic building in downtown Asheville. The Walmart takes up 34 acres. The downtown mixed-use project takes up 2/10 of an acre. Think about how much taxation per acre each of those projects applies. Then think about how many jobs per acre they each produce. And then think about how many residents per acre each of those projects produce. So last year, late in the fall, I was in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Fayetteville, Arkansas. So this is to give you a small town example. So I'm driving in, the airport is outside of Bentonville, which is north of Fayetteville. You got to fly, you fly into Bentonville, you drive down the interstate to Fayetteville. And I got off the interstate, and there's a Waffle House right next to the interstate exit. And I drove then into downtown Fayetteville, and I saw this other Waffle House. And it's a new building, and it's right on the main street, and there's 3 floors of apartments upstairs. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And so I went over to the city hall, and I said to them, tell me about those Waffle Houses. Which one's making more money? And here's what they said. The downtown Waffle House is making 15% more than the one out on the strip. And it's producing more taxes per acre, more jobs per acre, more residents per acre. They have 73 people living above the Waffle House in downtown Fayetteville. No one lives above the Waffle House out at the strip. So you start to see why this kind of development has more of a financial future than all this segregated development that we've been doing for years. And there's the other big advantage. It's a concept in the real estate industry we call the place-making dividend. What does that mean? It means people stay longer, come back more often, and spend more money in places that attract their affection. So people actually like places like this, and they'll hang out there. All right. Retail's rediscovering our cities. There's only one place left, as I said before, with more spending power than stores. So let me give you an example. Fairfax County had 40 square feet of retail space per person. D.C. had 9. Okay? D.C. is now one of the fastest growing cities in the country. 2,000 people a month are moving back into the city, which is kind of unbelievable when you think about it. So, you know, the retail industry is changing to keep pace with them. So that's a new target in D.C. But here's sort of the old paradigm, sort of Walmart, the building itself covers 4 acres. It's down by 12 to 20 acres of parking. But, we talk to these people. So here's what the vice president for real estate at Walmart told us not too long ago. We've reached a stage where we can be flexible. We no longer have to build a gray blue battleship box. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Walmart. Let me show you what the future is. There it is. It's in multi-story big boxes, okay? If you have 2 stories, it means you use half as much land, which means you can put it back in a downtown. Which means it's like what we used to call a department store. And the big issue for years was, well, how do you get the shopping cart up and down? And of course the answer was, well, hey, we did figure out how to put a person on the moon. I think we can figure out how to get the shopping carts up and down. And of course they have escalators for your shopping carts now. Here's the brand new first Walmart in Washington. There it is. It's amazing. It's in a 5-story building. The Walmart is on the first floor. 4 floors of housing upstairs. There's a swimming pool on the roof. There's a fitness center in the glass area right there. There are locally owned stores around the Walmart, and you see the windows above there? They actually let in real sunlight through real windows onto the floor of the Walmart. Who would have thought that was possible? Real sunlight with real windows in a Walmart. Here's the new Walmart in Tyson's Corner, under construction right now. Here's a new Walmart. I just saw it. It's under construction right now in downtown Knoxville, Tennessee. Half of the store is a Publix grocery store. The Walmart sells no groceries at all. They made a deal. And all the parking's under the building, by the way. And we're starting to restore our old department stores, like the Carson Prairie Stop building in Chicago. Target bought the building and just restored it and it's moved back in. Or did the same thing in downtown Portland, Oregon. Or how about the Home Depot in New York City? I showed this picture a couple of weeks ago. Somebody said to me, well, how do you get your lumber home? And the answer is they deliver. Oh, wow, what a concept. So, all right, I want to end, turn the light back on if you could, just by talking for a second about, and I know we're running short on time, about the secrets of successful communities. Failing to plan simply means planning to fail. As the book of Proverbs says, without vision, the people will perish. Try to imagine a company that did not have a business plan. It would have a very hard time attracting investors. That's the same thing with a community. If you don't have a plan for the future, you're going to have a hard time attracting investors. And successful plans always begin by inventorying your assets. And successful communities build their plans, whether it's a land use plan, a tourism plan, an economic development plan, around the enhancement of their existing assets. Successful communities use education, incentives, partnerships, and voluntary initiatives, not just regulation. You got to use carrots, not just sticks. You know, you never create great communities by regulation alone. You need to make it easy to do the right thing. Okay? Successful communities, you know, pick and choose among development proposals. All development is not created equal. You know what the biggest impediment to better development in rural communities in Virginia is? It's a fear of saying no to anything. Well, if you're afraid to say no to anything, you'll get the worst of everything. Communities that set no standards or low standards will simply compete to the bottom. Communities that set high standards will compete to the top because they know that if you say no to bad development, you're always going to get better development in its place. Successful communities think about what they look like. Successful communities have strong leaders and committed citizens. When I was growing up in Birmingham, this was the only city we used to make fun of, Chattanooga, Tennessee. Now, what does that tell you? They were called the most polluted city in America, known as a patch of rust in the Sun Belt. Today, nobody makes fun of Chattanooga anymore. Today, it's known as an international model for community revitalization. And it all began with a vision for the future. And, you know, they realized that, you know, how much something cost was not the most important question. It was the second most important question. What's the most important question facing James City County or any other community in America? It's not how much it costs, it's what should we do? What should we do? And money will always follow good ideas, especially if those ideas come out of a consensus building process. You know, this is another small town example. This is Susan City, California. In 1980, it was voted the worst place to live in Northern California, and that was their city hall. It was in 2 double-wide trailers. This is the only city hall in California that had to register with the Department of Motor Vehicles. But, you know, it turns out public buildings are kind of important. And, you know, they used to set the standard in our community, always. From 1700 to 1960, they were always our most beautiful buildings, whether it was the courthouse, the public school, the library, you named it. And then we decided cheaper was better. You know what we've learned? Cheaper is simply cheaper. And you know what they said in Susan City? They said, why would anybody invest in a community that wouldn't invest in itself? That's the way you got to think about economic development. Think about that. Why would anybody invest in James City County if you won't invest in yourselves? So they said, we're going to build a new city hall right in that same spot. And that turned that community around. That began a decade-long transformation. And so in 1990, they were voted one of the best places to live in Northern California. It all began with an investment in themselves. Successful communities inventory their assets, natural, cultural, agricultural, human, economic, educational, and then they build their plans around them. Sometimes the assets are pretty obvious. Welcome back to Jackson, Wyoming. World-class scenery, unparalleled wildlife resources. Or how about welcome to Annapolis, Maryland? Unparalleled architectural and historical things, legacy. So they've built their plans around the enhancement of all that. Sometimes the assets of the community are not very obvious. Welcome to Lowell, Massachusetts. 1975 was a dying industrial city. It had an unemployment rate of 28%. It had never seen a single tourist, and it thought it had no assets. But what it had was abandoned textile mills and good leadership. And they said, we need to create a plan to reuse those mills, and they did that. Today, this is the Charleston, South Carolina of New England. Today, they get almost 1 million tourists a year. It all began with a vision for the future built around the enhancement of their existing assets, those abandoned textile mills. Let me give you a few other examples. Here's one in Virginia, the torpedo factory in downtown Alexandria, which is now the largest and most successful arts center in the United States. Or how about, a lot of communities in the Midwest, they have these flood walls all along the river. Turns out in Paducah, Kentucky, they decided to turn it into an art gallery. And by the way, they also started selling abandoned houses to artists for $1 in exchange for their agreement to restore them. They've gotten over 120 artists to restore 70 houses in their downtown arts district. Or how about Rapid City, where they didn't have any parks downtown. So they took that parking lot and they've turned it into their new square right in downtown. Or how about the High Bridge in Poughkeepsie, New York? It's a bridge, an abandoned railroad bridge, 273 feet above the Hudson River. And it burned in a fire in 1973, and the New York DOT had set aside $14 million for the demolition of that bridge. But the community said, we got a better idea. Let us use the same amount of money you would use, and we're going to turn it into the nation's longest pedestrian bridge. Now it's a state park that is attracting 600,000 people a year to Poughkeepsie, which was the most challenged community in all of the Hudson River Valley. Or how about in a rural area like this? This is the Cherry Springs State Park, one of 33 state parks in north central PA, an area known as the Pennsylvania Wilds. And there was like nothing going on here. In fact, a lot of the local people used to sit around and just bitch and moan and complain about land off the tax rolls. It was not like anybody was doing anything with the land that was on the tax rolls. So interestingly, though, so one day, the manager of this park has this guy comes in and knocks on his door and says, can I come in and talk to you? And he says, sure. He says, I'm so-and-so, and I'm with the International Dark Sky Association. He goes, what's that? He goes, well, we're astronomers. He said, do you know how valuable what you have here is? And he goes, what are you talking about? He said, well, that's the darkest spot in the eastern United States. And they went from that discussion, turning this into the nation's first dark skies park. They have relationships with 5 universities now. They have astronomy festivals. It turns out that is more valuable, that state park, than an industrial park that they couldn't get to come there anyway. It's figuring out how to turn lemons into lemonade. You have 58 farms in this county. That's not a lot of farms. Okay? How do you use those agricultural and forestal resources to create a new economic engine for the county? It won't be a huge engine, but it certainly can be bigger than now, where it's a negative economic engine, where it's costing the people more money, which is, of course, why why it turns out to be more profitable to grow houses than to grow crops. So you got to think about other ways to generate income. How about Greenburg, Kansas? They tore the entire city was destroyed in a terrible tornado a few years back. Now it has more LEED, that's green buildings, per capita than any community in America. So you know what was interesting about that? They said when we build back, we want to build back better. Adversity can breed opportunity in economic development. Successful communities cooperate with their neighbors for mutual benefit. So the city of Williamsburg or York County or the whole area as a whole work together to create, make the whole greater than the sum of its parts. And I already talked about the research triangle. This really resulted from private leadership. Everybody was leaving. All the young people were leaving the research triangle. Now it's one of the greatest high-tech areas in the world, because they had these 3 great universities. They decided they should work together. Successful communities use education, incentives, partnerships, and voluntary initiatives, not just regulation. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I'm against regulation. Regulation prevents bad things from happening, sets a minimum standard of conduct. But as I said, you got to use carrots, not just sticks. Why do we educate? In order to reduce the need to regulate. Why do we educate? Because people won't embrace what they don't understand. Why do we educate? Because the citizens of this county have a right to choose the future, but also to know what the choices are. We need to use incentives. And let me give you a couple of examples of just incentives. So this is the Lone Star Brewery in San Antonio. It was vacant for about 25 years until they used an historic preservation tax credit to turn it into an incredible museum of art. Let me give you another example. How about conservation easements? It's a way to save your view and get a tax break too. You know, Virginia's got this incredible program that you can sell, transferable tax credits on easements. How about this one? I love this. This is Yazoo City, Mississippi. There was a guy there who went to Ireland. You heard about this program called the Tidy Towns program? Tidy Town is simply they give free paint to downtown business owners. This downtown was nothing happening. They set up a tidy town, started to offer free paint. Here's downtown today. And downtown came to life with free paint, and people started paying attention again. Successful communities pick and choose because all development is not created equal. Successful communities have a quality of life lobby. That's a small group of people willing to work to see that your vision gets actually implemented. Successful communities, I understand it's not always easy getting things done in rural Virginia. And no is a powerful word everywhere in rural America. But you know what's a more powerful word? Yes. Yes, we can make James City County a better place to live in, to look at, to work in, to visit. A pessimist sees difficulty in every opportunity. An optimist sees opportunity in every difficulty. And leadership is pretty darn important, although we sometimes don't appreciate it. I love this quote from Monty Python, who says, apart from education, I can't even read it now, sanitation, medicine, education, wine, public roads, irrigation, public health, and freshwater system, what have the Romans ever done for us? I love that bit. If you don't care who gets the credit, you get an awful lot done in America. Ladies and gentlemen, a vision counts, but implementation is priceless. I hope I've given you some ideas for the future. Thank you so much for having me here this evening.